Hailed as the father of modern psychology today, in his time he was jokingly referred to as the love doctor. His theories on sex and human sexuality brought him scorn and ridicule. Some dismissed him as a pervert. Often lampooned, the object of satire, and controversial to this day, the name Sigmund Freud is as recognizable now as it was when he was alive. It took a while for the world to catch up to Sigmund Freud's ideas, but he always believed throughout his life that he would make an impact on the world. Well, in his taboo study of sex, Freud lifted the lid off of a society where sexual repression was a fact of life. Here is our biography of the archaeologist of the mind, Dr. Sigmund Freud.
In 1938, at the age of 81, Sigmund Freud, the father of modern psychiatry, recorded a brief statement about his life and career, the only recording he ever made.
I started my professional activity trying to bring relief to my neurotic patients. I discovered some important new facts about the unconscious.
He found in the repressed areas of the mind what had been banished from conscious thought: fantasies of incest, fantasies of murder, repressed hatreds.
He is pushing sexuality back to a period when most people thought children were innocent, and extending the whole notion of what do we mean by sexual.
His reputation was that he was a libertine. He wrote pornographic materials, that he was a dirty, filthy, disgusting person.
People did not believe in my facts and thought my theories unsavory. In the end, I succeeded, but the struggle is not yet over. Sigmund Freud.
Sigismund Shlomo Freud was born on May 6, 1856, in the tiny Moravian village of Freiburg, about 100 miles north of the Austro-Hungarian capital of Vienna. His father, Jacob, was a Jewish wool merchant who could barely make ends meet in a hostile and at times dangerously anti-Semitic environment. Jacob was 42 years old when Sigmund was born, 20 years older than his third wife, Amalie. The family, which lived in a single room and included 2 adult half-brothers, was a confusing place to grow up in.
He's got 2 half-brothers that basically look like they're old enough to be fathers and husbands to his mother. He's got a father who's old enough to look like his grandfather. So there must have been a tremendous, tremendous puzzle to Freud to figure out who belongs to whom.
The puzzle got worse when Freud was 2 and his mother had a second son, Julius, who died 6 months later.
The experience of birth and death under very close circumstances must have been not only disturbing, but stimulating, even overstimulating for the child.
Young Sigismund was named after a legendary Moravian emperor. Born with thick black hair, an old peasant woman said he was destined for future greatness. My golden Siggy, his mother called him. In 1860, the Freuds moved to Vienna, a grand European capital with a crowded Jewish ghetto. The family was growing. By the time he was 10, Sigmund had 5 sisters and a brother, but the golden child was still getting special treatment.
Freud was the only person in the family who had his own room where he could study, read. When one of his sisters started to take up the piano, she reported that the noise disturbed Freud. As a result of his complaint, the piano was removed, which gives you some indication of this very special position.
Freud justified his position by earning top marks at his Jewish grade school and by studying languages on his own. By the time he was 12, he was reading Shakespeare in the original and was fluent in 6 languages. He studied obsessively, taking meals in his room to save time. And he developed an unusual hobby.
He had kept a boyhood record of his dreams. So here we have the future interpreter of dreams as a boy writing down his dreams and keeping a record of them. This interest in dreams and fantasy life was obviously something that he developed very early, and I think it's quite unusual.
Freud's dreams were unusually heroic. At the age of 10, he named his baby brother Alexander in honor of Alexander the Great. He identified with Napoleon, and he bristled at the humiliating anti-Semitism of Vienna, which gave his ambition a combative edge.
When Freud is a preteen, his father tells him how he had walked down the street and how a non-Jew had come over to him and said, "Jew, get off the pavement," and knocked his hat off. And Freud asked his father, "What did you do?" And his father said, "Well, I just got off, and picked up my hat and walked on." Freud felt this as a terribly humiliating position to have taken.
He vowed that he would behave differently if and when he was attacked, physically or otherwise. And he was certain that he would one day make a name for himself on his terms.
He told a young playmate in letters when he was an adolescent, "Save these letters. You never know how important they will be. You never know," he said.
In 1873, Freud entered medical school at the University of Vienna. While still a student, he did important research on the sexual organs of eels. He dissected over 400, and the nervous systems of fish, which he illustrated in a letter to a friend. Freud wanted to become a research scientist, but there was a quota for Jews in that prestigious field. Reluctantly, and in order to make a living, he decided to become a doctor. He was anxious to make a living because he had fallen in love with a friend of his sister's, 20-year-old Martha Bernays. Freud, 25, was both passionate and shy, and the romance was intensely Victorian.
It's a classically Victorian love affair where most of it took place by correspondence, and I think at one point when he asked her to marry him, she squeezed his hand under the table, so it was all very, very proper.
The young man, Freud, was inexperienced with women, and I think Martha was going to be the princess and preside, and he would be her knight errant.
The engagement lasted 4 years, an ordeal of abstinence, during which Freud saw Martha, who lived in Germany with her mother, just 6 times. He wrote her over 900 intensely romantic letters, addressing her as "my beloved princess" and "my dearest treasure." One letter included an ink blot, a Freudian ink blot.
Here the pen fell out of the writer's hand and wrote this secret sign. Please forgive, and don't ask for an interpretation.
The long engagement made Freud impatient for professional success, and in 1884 he began researching a new drug that he thought might win him fame. The drug was cocaine.
He's looking for the lucky hit. And he had heard about the therapeutic effects of cocaine, I think, with Austrian soldiers, and decided to experiment it with himself and with a colleague of his, and very, very hastily started really advocating in published form the use of cocaine as a therapeutic adjunct. He was unaware that it had an addictive property.
Indeed, Freud was taking liberal doses of cocaine, and even sending an occasional half-gram to Martha, to be divided into 5 large or 8 small doses, as he instructed. As for himself, Freud promised that the next time she saw him, he would be a big wild man with cocaine